All right, looks like we are live. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. I'm your host, Aleks Pedikov, as always. Hope everyone's having a great Monday so far. This is my I don't know what that was. That was weird. I had some kind of interruption on my side. But anyway, back to where we were. If you haven't seen previous episodes, feel free to subscribe. Check out the playlist on the channel that has the rest of the live streams. This is actually the 50th live stream, which is pretty awesome. So there's been 50 shows, and we're almost at the 1-year anniversary of when I started the show. That'll be in April. We'll be doing kind of a cool show for that, for the 1-year show, I suppose. So with last week we had on Justin Chernopesky of Mountain Beast Mysteries. It was an awesome time talking to him. So definitely check that out. And like I said, check out the rest of the episodes. Feels cool to be at number 50 here. But next week, actually, it's going to be a little different. I'm not actually going to be hosting the show at all. So Karac St. Laurent of Crash Course Cryptozoology, who's been on the program a few times, he's always asking some good questions in the comments as well. He's actually going to be hosting the show entirely by himself. He's going to be doing a presentation on his favorite Bigfoot evidence, I believe, or some of the most compelling Bigfoot pieces of evidence regarding Bigfoot, in his opinion. He's going to do a presentation. Really smart guy. It's going to be awesome to see that. I'm actually going to be out in the Pacific Northwest. We're doing our Pacific Northwest trip. We're going to be filming out there with the Olympic Project, and it's going to be pretty hectic. So I won't have service at all. So I won't have any idea how the show's going, but definitely tune in for that because Karac is awesome. And it's going to be an awesome show. But for tonight's show, we're really excited to have on Joe Perdue. So Joe is a really awesome guy. I met him actually at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but he's from the state of West Virginia. Wonderful place. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran as well as a master naturalist. He's the co-owner of Wild and Weird West Virginia, as well as the co-host of Wild and Weird Radio and the co-founder of the West Virginia High Strangeness Collective. Joe has researched some of the strange occurrences in West Virginia, including Bigfoot reports. He was also recently featured as a witness and investigator on the Finding Bigfoot special called Finding Bigfoot, The Search Continues. People might have seen that. That came out fairly recently. So without further ado, let's bring Joe on.
What's going on, man?
Good. Nice to have you on. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, glad to be here. We've been talking about getting on this show now for, it feels like forever. But
yeah, I think I originally... When I started the show, I originally did want to have you on. So that was quite a while ago, almost a year now. But, the way it goes with scheduling and how crazy everything's been, it's tough to pin people down sometimes. But that's why we're here now, and we're happy to have you on. And I know it's going to be an awesome time talking to you about all kinds of awesome stuff. So let's just start out, I guess, as I do, always with the basics. What got you into where you're at now, into the weird, into the paranormal, Bigfoot, cryptids, all that stuff?
Yeah. So I kind of have the same story that everybody else my age has, which is, the Leonard Nimoy In Search Of and all that. So I'll spare the bulk of that because everybody's heard of it. But, I had a grandmother who really fostered this kind of interest, and we would watch all that stuff together. She had Native American background, so there was, some stuff that you wouldn't typically learn growing up that I was being taught, which was really cool. And then I had a sighting of my own in 2001. Wow. We can get into that later if you want. And that sighting really shook me up to the point, it didn't scare me. It was a peaceful deal. Like I observed for, it felt like forever, because I was kind of in a hunting blind that I wasn't in a blind itself, but I was in the brush, and it was it's how we hunt here in Appalachia. Instead of cheating and using a blind, you figure out what the good spots are, right? So yeah, I got to observe these things till the wind shifted on me. And then when they picked up my scent, they took off and moved, and I went the other direction. Just thankful that they didn't decide they were going to come my way. So that really stuck with me, and it created an interest. And I'm sure, do you remember the old because back then there was no resources, because this was in 2000. Of course. You had the old John Green books and stuff. If you could make it to a library that had them, Our libraries did not have them. So, my only resource, internet was really kind of brand new, and Angel Fire was a thing.
Right.
And there was a Bigfoot forum on Angel Fire. And I went on there and would sit and go through all kinds of information and try to pick stuff out and learn as much as I could and try to make sense of what I saw in the woods. And then I joined the military. That kind of the interest had to go away,
Right.
because I was in the Air Force, and you just don't talk about that kind of stuff. UFOs, Bigfoot, no, you just don't. You don't want to ostracize yourself.
Hey, you don't want to be the Bigfoot guy in most situations, right, let alone, I'm sure, in the military.
Right. And then I got involved. Once I got out of the military, I got involved with church and church leadership and things like that. And again, it's another place you don't want to be the Bigfoot guy. So I was this closet Bigfoot guy forever. And my wife will tell stories about how like I just sprung it on her one day. I'm like, okay, you're in the circle now. I am like the biggest Bigfoot nerd ever. Look.
It's like the big secret you have.
Yeah. And then we started, because I'd known Ron forever, and we'd been doing things before, Wild and Weird. And it just never, for whatever reason, Ron had been burned out on research because he was involved in paranormal research for 2 decades and had a lot of falling outs with various people because of their ethics and whatnot, and had a really bitter taste in his mouth from it. So he wasn't interested in it. I didn't know what to do. I was not about to go out and just go knocking on trees and like screaming in the night without really knowing what was going on. And so we didn't get involved into that kind of aspect until about 4 years ago, when we launched Wild and Weird West Virginia. And since then, we've been active field investigators. I mostly follow up on Bigfoot reports. That's the beauty of the West Virginia Highest Ranges Collective, is we're a multidisciplinary research crew. We have guys who've researched ghosts for ages. We have guys who's researched UFOs for ages. We have Bigfoot researchers, and we kind of keep to our kind of what our specialty is for the most part. We're all versed enough to be dangerous in other topics, but we may mostly kind of work within our niche. And so I mostly field the Bigfoot reports. Ron comes out with me, and Dave will come out with me from time to time as well. And we'll go looking and follow up.
Wow, that's quite a way to get into it. I mean, really, it's interesting, that so many people I've talked to as well that have had experiences that couldn't really relate to anybody else because they didn't really know that, like you said, it was either libraries or the few online resources. I know a bunch of people that have got into it, even afterwards because of Facebook and other social media, where they realized, hey, I'm not the only one, especially in an area like West Virginia. Now, I do want to ask, growing up in West Virginia, did you hear stories, or did people talk about it, or was it just not very common to hear Bigfoot stuff or sort of related tales?
Growing up, you didn't hear a whole lot about Bigfoot. You heard about this.
The wood booger.
You heard wood booger, or you heard the booger. There's a lot of hollers here in the area in southern West Virginia that are called Booger Hollow, or they're called Growl Hollow or Howling Hollow.
Wow.
You've got then the White Thing. That's another. It's a white Bigfoot. But you didn't hear a whole lot of people talking about Bigfoot until probably Finding Bigfoot came around. Once Finding Bigfoot became popular and became this pop culture phenomena that it was, then people started talking about Bigfoot more in using the term Bigfoot and getting away from wood booger, woolly booger. Then there were Booger Man, all those different things that they would talk about. And the Wild Man, of course. West Virginia is very, very well known for Wild Man reports.
Sure.
Dating back into the, 17 and 1800s.
Wow. So that's one of those things where it's like many other parts of the country where, the term Bigfoot and Sasquatch really didn't come until later. They're pretty
Right.
regionalized. I mean, Sasquatch and Bigfoot to the Pacific Northwest and California, you have so many different parts of the country where they're, wood boogers, wood apes, grassman, wood devils, mountain devils, lots of different terms. So that's really interesting to hear that the wild man stuff. Do you see that, when kind of common knowledge of gorillas became a thing? Are there reports back into, the 20th century that talk about gorillas?
Yeah, there are. Right at the turn of the century, you got some reports of some escaped gorillas from a circus, things like that.
Circus motif, very common. Yeah.
Yep. And they would always pin it back on a circus or P.T. Barnum coming through the area, something of that nature. There was one particular one that stands out. It was actually a sighting that took place on train tracks. And they said a gorilla was basically just like standing there on the train tracks and then took off up into the woods when the train came around. I'd have to find the exact report to send it to you, but that was one of the more prominent ones that stand out as a gorilla.
That's really interesting. Yeah, like I said, the circus thing tends to pop up a lot. I mean, you've got different. One that comes to mind, the Jacko story out in British Columbia, the Honey Island swamp monster. They say that escaped from a circus train that crashed. Yeah. It's always a crashing circus train, but it is really interesting because, as you mentioned, it's that turn of the century. Once that gorilla entered the lexicon. Before that, as I'm sure you were talking about, there's a lot of wild man reports. Is there any particular wild man report, pre like Civil War era that you're aware of?
Yeah, and it actually took place where I live.
Wow, that's so cool.
When I say where I live, I literally mean where we bought our house. Not the town, but the actual road, the holler, and everything.
No kidding. That is quite the history.
Yeah, and we actually bid on 2 different houses. We were trying to get two different houses in this area before we actually ended on this one, and it was because I knew about that report.
Oh. So the Bigfoot passion is like, it runs deep.
It runs deep, man. And then when my wife found out about all that, she was like, "Are you kidding me? That is why you want to live in that subdivision so bad?" Yes, because we don't live in your typical subdivision. We're out in the middle of the woods.
Right.
My house, my backyard for 20 miles is just forest.
Oh, that's ideal.
Yeah, it's just there's like 100 houses out here in a big circle, and it's forest in the middle and forest all around.
Wow. So what happened in that report, the historical encounter?
They actually got together a band of, I guess, like a mob, an angry mob,
like a monster hunting posse,
torches, and they ran down and shot the beast over 80 times, is what the report said. Wow. And it basically shrugged it off, and they knocked it down at one point, and it got down into like this little bowl, and they had it kind of pinned in, and that's when they started firing on it, and you had all these men firing off their muskets, and then this thing just bolts and takes off up into the woods screaming. And so I was just like, "Oh, that is just awesome."
Wow, that is really cool. I mean, the fact that it happened so close to where you're at, and I know you've had stuff happen in that area. You've sent me pictures and stuff that you've had pretty much right in your backyard, right? So
yes, one of them was right in my backyard. It was very interesting. And my wife, again, she was on the fence on thinking like, okay, I just married a crazy man. And then when we were out here on our back patio, she actually heard what is commonly referred to as the samurai chatter.
The samurai chatter.
And it was two different creatures. One was down the creek, the other was up the creek near the ridge. And she said they sounded like they were talking to each other, and it sounded like 2 drunk men having a fight or an argument. But they were just yelling really far away from one another. And one would go and the other one would go off. And then the other one would stop, and then the next one would start. And she came and got me, and I actually got to hear a little bit of it. But when you tried to record it on your phone, all you could hear was the cicadas. So I didn't have a good recorder at that point like we do now. And otherwise, I probably would have been able to get a little bit of it. But all you could hear was bug chatter.
Wow. I mean, either way, that's pretty fascinating to hear that. And
Yeah.
so it pushed her a little bit more into perhaps a
Yeah.
middle ground, maybe.
Well, no, she's now to the point where she says for 100% there's something in the woods. She don't know what it
Okay.
is, but there's something in the woods.
Making progress.
Yeah, man.
That's so
we're
cool.
almost there.
No, I mean, that's just really interesting. Hearing obviously the samurai chatter is something that's talked about a lot. Now, I did want to ask you a question actually about the term holler. Now, obviously that's used in Appalachia in the South and some of these areas to describe these sort of little areas of low ground, right? Almost like where the ridge line, right? I mean, it's kind of like a little,
so what you're looking at geologically, or geographically rather, as in reference to a holler or a hollow, is the valley between two mountains. And typically there's going to be a creek running down the middle of it. And it's just a drainage creek. It's not going to be a creek that runs year round. Sometimes it can be, depending on how many springs are feeding it. But typically it's just a runoff where, if you look topographically at a mountain ridge, you'll see all these cutaways running from the ridge line down. Those are drainage streams, and that's where water and runoff is going to collect and go down into the valley. Down at the very bottom of the valley, it usually forms a larger stream because you're going to have, just on one hill or one mountain, you're going to have 20 or 30 of these streams, if not hundreds, feeding all into that creek. So the creek at the very bottom can sometimes be 15 to 20 feet wide. And then that's where it's normally flat land too, because you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of years of erosion has kind of swept away a lot of the sandstone and made the bedrock kind of level here in the very bottoms of these hollers. And that's where a lot of the people will build their houses, because Appalachia is known for its steep hills and mountains. They're not gradually inclining very slowly. It's you're standing here and you can like look straight up, and if you're going to try to hike it, you're going to have to be a beast. So these valleys are so tight that it's hard to build houses on the sides of the mountains. So everybody will build their houses in these hollers, and that's where everybody tends to collect. Well, water tends to collect there as well.
Makes sense.
What water brings in? Water will bring in deer, small game. It also becomes a place where the water table will be relatively high. So your ground is going to stay nice and moist, which also makes it a rich, growing, fertile ground for berries. You're going to have a massive mycological body that will be living down there, where you'll have mushrooms galore.
Hundreds. Obviously, you guys do a lot of collecting of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, you have
I'm
American ginseng.
Tomorrow. I'm going out tomorrow, going to go look for some molly moochers.
Awesome.
Those are morels for anybody who doesn't live down this way.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that, and thank you for that sort of geological history. I'm sure that'll be interesting for people, because you hear that word thrown around a lot, hollers, that kind of thing, and obviously you kind of have to be from the area to know some of that stuff. But it's interesting, somebody living in the northern part of the Appalachian Mountains. That's what I'm more used to. It's all granite up here. We don't even have many caves. We don't have sandstone. The only types of caves we have is like giant glacial rock overhangs that'll create like this sort of passageways, and nothing like down when you get into Pennsylvania and Virginia, West Virginia. I mean, I've been caving in some of those areas, some really amazing stuff. I mean, even recently I was at the one Island Ford cave. No, I was at Island Ford, which is like right near the West Virginia border in like far western Virginia. I mean, 30 minutes drive, we could have been in, to the border of West Virginia. And I think that cave is actually managed by the West Virginia Caving Society or something like. It was Covington, Virginia. That was basically the area. So, and I've been to other caves in those areas up and down, and it's just like amazing to see the difference. So to hear that, it definitely clears it up a little bit. But just wanted to say hi to everyone in the chat. I see there's a lot of awesome folks tuning in. Gabriel Ringenberg says, I'm a new subscriber. Welcome, Gabriel.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think he was saying as well, he's from West Virginia. And I believe Aleks Joshua says Joe is one of my best friends. So
hey, what's going on, man?
kind of cool. I always love seeing that with people and their friends coming on the program. So welcome, and hey to everyone else. I see Mike, Tactical Bigfoot Research, is in there. A lot of great people in the chat. Just wanted to say hi, guys. Just acknowledge everyone. But back onto the topic. So obviously, as we're talking about haulers and all this kind of stuff, you're talking about all the natural resources. Now, do you find certain times a year, let's say, now that it's getting nice and beautiful down there? I mean, I know you guys don't have as harsh of winters, but when the resources come out, is there a spike in reports, or what time of year do you typically see more reports? Because up here, it's like the fall. It really depends where you go.
We get a lot of reports when the berries come on. So you're looking early spring, really early spring, the berries start to come on. As soon as the laurels start to really bud, you'll get some sighting reports coming in, because the flowers on a mountain laurel are actually very nutritious. They're packed with vitamins. Then you've got early mushrooms coming in, like your morels. Now, here in West Virginia, we have mushrooms year round. We even have a species of mushroom that's called the winter oyster.
Oh, nice.
And I love eating mushrooms. And the winter oyster is one of my favorites. They're super sweet and they're packed full of nutrients. And you can find these bad boys in January with a foot of snow on the ground.
Very cool.
So those are more available in the late winter, early spring, so something like that. Then we have another spike that kicks off around early to mid-October. We'll start getting some reports typically in late August, but for the most part, once all the foliage starts to drop, you know what it's like. These mountains get thick fast.
Oh yeah, it's like you can't see 3 feet in there. And I mean, I've been to West Virginia just in like late September, and yeah, we were out in the woods in some of these areas, and man, it's
thick.
It's you can't see, and especially if you're in an area with tall grass. I mean, it's just, it's very difficult. Even with something like a fleur, you can't really just penetrate through some of these objects that are there. So
yeah,
anything could be hiding back there,
and it could be hiding very close to you because they're. We've had reports of people that have been walking up and all of a sudden the laurels started shaking 10 feet from them and something bolted out screaming up the side of the mountain. And because the laurel thickets are probably the most dense cover that we have that will just sporadically pop up. And they like to grow in the understory. So they're green year round, but as soon as the leaves drop, they get very, very thick, because now they're getting sunlight that hadn't been available to them all spring and summer. So that's when they get thick. So as soon as the canopies drop and you start thinking, oh yeah, this will be good, we might catch something on a FLIR, you might be able to catch something on thermal, that's when the laurels get thick.
Right.
And now you've got this entire dense layer that's like 10 to 12 feet tall and looks like you're trying to look through a brick wall.
So year round, there's ample cover and resources in West Virginia for all sorts of critters. I mean, not just potentially Sasquatch, but Sasquatch obviously would fit into that category.
We right now the salamanders are moving. They started moving about 2-3 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago. And that's one of the things that, as master naturalists and all that stuff, we get together and we look and we study and we chart the movements of the creatures moving through the parks and whatnot, because we're monitoring and seeing which species are doing better, which ones are we not seeing this year that we saw last year, things of that nature. Well, last year, a member of the West Virginia Herpetological Society was out, and he had an encounter with one of these things. And we actually, I've known him for a while because working with reptiles, I've worked with reptiles for about 25 years now. And he and I have been friends for a while. So he got a hold of me knowing that we were into the Bigfoot stuff and would be interested. And he was hoping that we would be able to tell him that it was not Bigfoot. And so I went out the next morning after he sent the report in, and it had been raining. Not hard. It was just a real light rain, and it kept the ground in perfect condition. And we actually retrieved 2 casts. Those were the ones that the Finding Bigfoot took some excitement in, and decided that they wanted to have us come on, and they wanted to come check out our area.
That is cool, and that's actually what I was going to ask, because I do remember. Obviously, I saw that's Finding Bigfoot special recently, as I referenced at the beginning, and you were on there, and as well as that encounter with your colleague there, which I think is really awesome. And it was definitely cool to have you guys talking about what happened there in the woods. I did just want to read this comment from the meme master himself. Mothman 46 says psychobilic mushrooms too.
Maybe in the farmland, not here, not down where we're at.
And Tate Hieronymus says, I'm an old subscriber. Oh, it's that guy who's related to Bob Hieronymus again. This guy won't leave me alone. No, I'm just kidding. It's Tate. We all like Tate sometimes.
Tate's a good
guy. But anyway, there was actually a pretty cool comment I did want to read. Oh, it just disappeared. Okay, Roger says, I live in Pike County, Kentucky, and my great aunt tell my cousins about a large hairy man type thing that used to be in the area. She'd tell us if we were in the woods alone to keep an eye out. So obviously that's not too far off from the West Virginia area.
I actually used to work in Pike County.
Oh, very cool.
So I'm only 2 hours from Pikeville, and it's thick down there, man. There's a lot of reports and a lot of stuff that come out of that area, because we also, aside from just West Virginia, I live close enough to the Kentucky border to go and check out reports that come in from Eastern Kentucky. And if it comes in and it's too far west, we'll pass it off to somebody who's out that way that I know will get out and look at it, like Charlie Raymond or something. But normally, like Pike County, that's somewhere we go. I typically don't go too much farther out than Grayson, Kentucky, if anybody's listening from that area. So if you've had some kind of encounter and you're between the Grayson area and West Virginia, or Pikeville and West Virginia, give us a shout.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've got your hands fully in a place like West Virginia, which is known for so much weird stuff aside from just Bigfoot, and we'll get into that a little bit. But maybe, did you want to show some of those casts, and then we'll start taking some questions? Yeah, that'd be awesome. He was showing me right before the show some of the casts that I believe were showed on Finding Bigfoot.
One of them. The tow bar you see is missing because there was a root that was right here, so the plaster just stopped at the root. But the nice part is there's this heel.
Right.
And then you've got the metatarsal break that it moves into. And this is one of the best captures of a heel that we've got. I know that Cliff really liked the heel on that one. Then this one, let's see if it wants to. Oh, good. It fused. This was the one that showed up on Cliff Barrickman's Facebook and on his Instagram.
Oh, cool.
You can see you got the mid-tarsal break. You've got the nice heel, and there's toes as well. And the toes, there's actually a tendon that shows up. You can't really see it on camera that well, but there's a tendon that shows up in the cast.
Up with the webcam. Now, did he actually make a copy of this, or did you send a copy off?
I made copies.
Nice.
I've actually made copies of this one, and we're getting ready to make copies of another one that I've got here.
Right.
From the Wineberry site. And but I've made copies of those. Are you going to be at OBC?
I'm not sure. Probably not. This month is just too crazy with everything going on, but I'm hoping to. Yeah. Unfortunately, probably not. But I'm hoping to maybe come out to your guys' event, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. But yeah, you do a lot of casts. There's a comment actually. I'll read in a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you want to, if you want to come down to the show, we'll put you up. So.
Yeah, it would be awesome. It would definitely be great. I've been digging to get down to West Virginia again. It's been way too long since I've been last time. I was going to come originally in the fall when you guys did some of the UFO stuff with STM, but it was like a very turbulent time, let's say.
Crazy weird. So those two, I've got copies of that cast that people can get if they want. Like if you're just a researcher and you're a cast collector, I've got copies of that one. I'll get you a copy of it for sure. Then this one was one that my wife found.
Oh, wow.
When we went out. This is a small juvenile foot.
Yeah, you can see the heel there.
And you got the heel there, and then there's a pinky toe.
Wow.
Right here. And you can see where the big toe right here. Doesn't really pick up too well on the camera, but it's there. You can see it a little bit better. Once I get them stained in, like the big toe's right here. You can kind of see the shadow setting on it from the light.
Right.
But yeah, it's a really small. This one's only 9 inches long, but it's 5 inches wide. So It's a very, very wide foot. Then do you want to show the bear ones?
Yeah, Remiel Acostus has very defined cast. Yeah, so it's great that detail is coming through. I know it's obviously hard sometimes on a webcam, but definitely pretty cool to see. Yeah, would love to see the bear.
So this is, and this will get us into the weird stuff. We'll go into the weird stuff, and we can talk about the Wineberry site in a minute, because the Wineberry site's probably the best cast that we've got so far. But the bear cast came in. A friend of mine who it's Dr. Russ Jones. He sent a report that was sent to him, and he was actually at his practice working. And he knew that I was able to get out. So he sent the report and passed it off to me. We went out to check it out. And somebody had reported seeing a big black creature, and it was making all kinds of noise, and it ran through a valley. Well, everything kind of sounded like a bear, but I didn't have anything else going on, and I just needed to get an excuse to get in the woods. So I took one. And this is what we came across with. Now, this, to some people, might look like the 67 print that was pulled out at the Patty site, at the PG film site. If you, I think it was Crew was who pulled that one. That has the nice mid-tarsal break in it, but the toe, everything looks real good. Now, this obviously doesn't look super good because we're pulling it out of like a PD substrate. But, you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, there's a break there. No, that's actually a separation of 2 feet. So this is the forepaw. Now, if you notice, a bear will here, let me get, I don't know if I can bend my hand that way. Bears walk like bulldogs. Black bears do. So they walk with their paws turned in like this.
Right.
And so you can see the toes, where the toes are turned in. I tried to scratch a little bit on them to get the toes to be a little bit more accentuated. And then you've got the break here between the toe and the pad. And then you've got the rear pad. And what is distinctive about the rear pad on a bear's foot is that it makes this nice V shape. See how it's quite different when compared to that.
Absolutely.
You've got a really hard V where this is nice and round. Same thing with this cast. You've got a nice round heel.
Yeah, exactly. You can see that curve. Yep.
And then that is still a V. So that is one of the easiest ways to tell that it is a bear double step.
It's a big looking bear. I mean,
oh man, this is a monster bear.
That is huge for a black bear.
This print is actually larger than the state record for a killed black bear in the state. And it's not just larger by a little. It's larger by 2 inches in length and 1 inch or 3 inches in width. So this,
that's getting into like brown bear territory. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, black bears do it. That's a monster right there. Yeah, Tate in the comments is double stepping bear print, often mistaken for Sasquatch prints. Yeah, definitely. That's one of the factors.
Very often, but one of the easiest ways that you can tell is, again, that V shape at the bottom. Now, here is another. I got to get way back for this one.
Oh my God, I can barely fit it in the frame.
It looks like a foot, kind of. Like you can use your imagination to see it looks like a foot. This is actually a scratch, a bear scratch from the same site. So this was right beside that double step. And this was a bear scratch where what they did is they'll put their foot in the ground, they'll just dig. They're scratching for worms or something.
Yeah.
They're trying to turn up grubs, trying to turn up worms, whatever. But this is a scratch. It starts off nice and wide, then tapers off. And you can actually, right here, see that we actually got one claw, two claw.
Oh, yeah. You can see the little.
You got those little, I'll try to get them against my shirt. There you go.
Yeah.
You can see the points so there cool. Now. Those are two claws we actually picked up in that one.
Very cool. So Mike actually asked, has Joe 3D scanned those prints so you can look for more definition? So there's like these 3D scanning apps. I think he knows of one. There's one we've talked about.
Those 3D scanning apps are terrible. We're also artists. So we've got a 3D printer. We have all of this stuff. The technology that we've used, we've tried to even use some of those 3D scanning apps,
right,
to make copies of these, to scan them, to look at them digitally. However, they just don't capture the detail. To have the scan done properly, it's going to take about between $15,000 and $20,000 scanner to actually scan these and get the detail out of them that you'd actually need. To do any kind of like research, looking at them on a screen. For us, that's just, we can't swing that kind of money towards a project like that.
Right.
What we'll do is we just make copies and we'll send them to people like Jeff or Cliff.
Sure. Right. That's a great way to do it. I mean, you just get to see it in person. You get that detail. And Mothman 46 says that's a great demonstration for Bigfoot buck fever type of evidence. So, a lot of times what happens with the so-called evidence is people jump in the gun. It's immediately that's what it is, and I like the way they put that buck fever. That's a good way to put it.
And that's why we kept those casts and preserved those as best as we could, because we actually put those on our table whenever we go out and do shows. We put those on our table for people to see them, because people be like, "Oh my gosh, that Bigfoot's huge." I'm like, not a Bigfoot.
No, it's great.
Yeah. So it's a good, it creates a nice teachable experience where, you can show people hands-on right there what they're looking at, why it's not a Bigfoot, and then show them something else right beside it that is 100% a Bigfoot.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think it's just important when you're out in the woods in general. Like if you find a good bear cast or a good bear print, cast it. I mean, that's something good to have for your own collection, just to be able to say, hey, check this out. Or, this is something you can compare it to if you find something that's sort of questionable or, unfamiliar with what it might be. I mean, if you're in an area that has obviously adequate conditions to kind of leave a nice track like that. So in general, if you find a good bear print, I would cast it overall, just because it's very tough, as I'm sure with a lot of the type of ground cover you guys have. It's probably not too different from up here, where it's just the conditions are often not great for lifting any kind of prints in a lot of areas. So,
and let's be real too. You're not going to find prints every time you go out,
right?
And you can't develop the skill sets that you get once you start working with plaster casting,
right,
without making casts. So my personal advice to anybody listening, if you are a Bigfoot enthusiast or you are a field researcher and you don't typically have a whole lot of casting that you find, you want to be prepared when you do actually find some of that evidence. So practice your craft, go cast every print you can find. Cast deer prints. You can tell the sex of deer by their hoof prints, and you can tell whether you're dealing with a dog or a coyote. You can look at different size bobcats and be able to tell how old they are by how big their paw prints are. Tell how many there might be in your area. Same goes for like turkeys and stuff. And cast in the worst possible conditions you can. Ruin a turkey print or ruin some deer hooves and before you go out and, figure out what works.
Right.
And
So if once you get to potentially a Sasquatch print, you don't
yeah,
want to not know what you're doing and muck it up, because we've heard those stories of people,
well, I've got
I
one. I
messed
did
them
it.
up, and yeah.
I poured the cast on my very first track that we ever found. We poured the cast or poured the plaster and tried to cast it, and it came out like chunks of Play-Doh.
Oh no, yeah.
It was just way too wet. So, there's various techniques that you can learn to cast in various conditions. Whether you like, I can cast now, where after I've been doing this for as long as we have been and working with various materials, I'm comfortable casting a footprint that's in the creek and being able to retrieve that print later. So it can be right on the edge of a creek bank and have water running into it on one side, and I can retrieve it now. After doing the research and learning all these various tips and tricks to making sure that your cast will come out right in whatever conditions you're in.
And he's not just saying that, folks. He, you've gotten a lot of experience not only with casting stuff out in the woods, but you do a lot of artistic work. You create a lot of little statues and things out of clay and other materials. I actually have on my bookshelf back there one of the little Mothmen that I got at the when I first met you guys at the Ohio Bigfoot conference a couple years ago. It's next to my other little cryptid figurines I have on my bookshelf. So you do a lot of that kind of stuff, and you do a lot of the reproductions of casts, which is really cool. How did you get into some of that stuff?
Well, we were going to shows and setting up these shows, and it was before the way we got into the art side of it and making those things entirely was I'm trying to not sound like a jerk. We went to a couple shows and we just weren't impressed with what we were seeing in some of the vendors sections.
Right.
And we knew that we could make something that people would actually want to buy. And we could make stuff that was like not made in China, because that's what a lot of everybody had, was this stuff that you could get off, looked like Oriental Trading Company. So, and that's so I'm not taking any pot shots at any of the other artists, because we made friends with tons of artists now at this point that are out in the circuit. But there any of the artists who go to these shows know for a fact that sometimes half of the vendors who are there are ordering all their stuff online. It's coming in, it's cheap, it's generic.
Yeah.
It all looks the same, and it's not that great. So we decided to make something good, and it worked. Everybody liked it. We started sculpting our own little collectible creatures and selling those, and that's part of what funds what we do with the research side.
And that's an awesome way to do it. You're creating something unique. And like I said, I mean, I saw the little Mothman guy, and if I remember correctly, he did have a bunch of other little things on display at that particular event, which was, as I said, the Ohio Bigfoot conference. But definitely awesome. And we'll get to talking about, your guys' event and what you're kind of planning. But I did want to take some questions from earlier from the audience. There was a couple of really awesome questions. So let me just let's see. Bill Mers asks, is Dolly Sods a hotspot for Bigfoot?
Not really. I even, oddly enough, I had this conversation with Russ Jones about 4 or 5 months ago. We, in the 20-some years that Russ has been collecting reports, I think he said he could count the reports from Dolly Sods on one hand. It's just a really populated area as far as tourists. Right. So, I mean, there might be a lot, there could be some activity, because honestly, the Sods, there's a whole lot of places out there that nobody goes.
Right.
There's tons of area that is just there, unless you're on a mountain bike or an ATV, and ATVs are illegal out that way. But unless you're on a mountain bike, you're not going to get to them. And unless you're hiking out for a day and a half, 2 days out into the wilderness, then, you're not getting out anywhere where you're away from people. Just because there's just a lot of human traffic up there.
I'm going to say people probably tend to stick in the same areas too, which, as
Yep.
you mentioned, are heavily trafficked, especially if it's like a national forest and it's got other touristy things around in that area. So you can only imagine, I mean, what that does with just the general wildlife. And something like a Sasquatch, obviously, that wants to be a little more elusive, perhaps, might not be a fan of that.
Yeah, we've actually never had a report sent in to us from the Sods. We've heard there's been a couple people who have seen mention them, but they're not reports that were in the last decade or 2 decades even. So it's just one of those areas where a lot of people, it's a hot spot for humans.
Right.
If you have a whole lot of humans in one area, they're not going to be there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Kevin asks, why the word booger seems an odd choice for a large, hairy ape-type creature?
Well, the whole boogeyman thing, right? It all stems from that. It was the creature that will get you in the night. Watch out for the booger man, and then the wood booger, because it was just some dude drinking another clear substance. Say, I need a booger. That's kind of where it derived from. It just started off, Appalachian folk have a lot of words that you don't use anywhere else.
Right. Very unique.
Yeah. And booger is definitely one of those. The wood booger, booger man, boogers. Yeah, it was just one of those things that when you heard that growing up, you just knew that meant some creature out in the woods.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, even some famous country songs, they mention down in Booger Creek and those kinds of terms, and you hear them far beyond just the people that are into this subject now. It's in Bigfoot and Sasquatch research, which I think is really cool, because as somebody who's into Bigfoot, you hear that someone else that probably is not thinking about Bigfoot, they mention that, it's like, well, I think there's some interesting history there, why that's called that way. Very cool. Brian and Chewy Go Hiking ask, have you found any types of structures or nests? I know in Washington State they have woven nests hidden in shrubs and honeysuckle bushes. Yeah, I'll actually be going out there next week. So
yeah, that's exciting. I had a feeling that's probably where you were going.
Oh yeah, I'm like packing all my stuff and
project guys.
Yeah. So we're gonna be out there with Shane primarily. Myself and Eli Watson are gonna be out there with him. Seth and the gang are gonna be. It's kind of gonna be. We're doing 2 productions at once, so it's gonna be.
You got room in your suitcase? I'll just
yeah, I know. Come on over. Yeah, exactly. Oh man, but yeah. What about the structure debate? Obviously, whether we're talking like the typical structures people claim, which I'm skeptical of a lot of that sort of stuff, but the nests, have you guys found anything interesting like that?
There has been 2 that I wouldn't call them structures. They're tree breaks that I'd found. And then I found one, and I can send you a picture of these 2. There was one, grapevine that was about this big that had been twisted apart, and you could tell it had been twisted apart because it was just all of the entire bundle of fibers were just splayed out, like just like each fiber had been individually busted apart. And so you had this nice tight grapevine that went up and like frizzed out. Right. And it did that on both sides. So it had been twisted apart. Then we found 2 archways, and I'm real picky about these. Okay. Being a master naturalist, I can look at most of these alleged tree structures and tell you exactly what happened and when it happened just by looking at the fauna around it. Because when trees die, they fall after so long. Well, most of the trees around them are of the same size, so they're going to be able to support the weight of a lighter dead tree, because the dead tree will not fall until it has been just ravaged by termites or other parasites. So it's, it's lost at least a quarter, if not more, of its original mass. And it's propped up against another tree. And then another tree falls over, a deadfall, and it makes an X. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, we got an X in the woods.
The X's,
Bigfoot.
yeah. It's one of those things. I mean, it's pretty contentious. Just
Like
specific. I mean, winter
get
damage,
me,
especially. I mean, you guys get some of
yeah,
that too. Up here, we get so much ice damage and the supposed arches. And I'm not saying not every single one of these could possibly be Sasquatch. I don't know. There's one reporting that I know from New Hampshire where this thing was seen inside a stacked stone structure. Now,
wow.
there haven't been any sighting. There haven't been really any other sightings of that kind of a thing. That was just one report. And I spoke to the guy a few years ago, but I mean, it's different when you're talking about the sort of the nest stuff where you've had primatologists that have looked at that and said, hey, something's going on here.
We haven't found any of the nests or anything that even implies that it would be a nest. Now, there are some things that we call crow's or not crow's perch, but not a crow's nest. It's a lookout point.
Right.
And they're little divots that are going to be on like a ridge line. And there will be a divot that you can set in and you can actually hide in. They're that deep. And we found several of those, but they're not sites where anything's bedding down and sleeping. These are temporary. They're just there almost like something's watching from him. We have so many caves and mines that I think, evolutionary adaptation kind of took place, and these creatures began to migrate towards using these way more efficient structures than, having to weave together a nest that takes time and burns calories. Let's just use something that's already here. Now, the two arches that I found, they both had a twist in them. Again, that's where I get interested. If I see an arch that's just snapped and broke over, that's a winter. That's an ice damage, wind damage. But when it's twisted, and then the tip of it, the top of one of them had been completely cleaned of all the branches. So it was stripped of all the branches, and the top of it was actually jammed down in the soil. So it made a complete arch. It wasn't just propped in the soil. It was buried in the soil at least a foot deep.
Right.
I actually kind of ripped it up out of the ground, looking to see how deep this thing went, to see if it was something that could have occurred naturally. But the tip of this thing was buried, and the limbs had been stripped, and there was a twist in the middle at the very top right here. It was just twisted, and you could see that the fibers of the tree were broken, and they were pointing in directions like this, which is indicative of a twist.
Right. Yeah,
so,
and that implies some sort of intentional use. Now, whether or not that was Sasquatch, that's the question. Right.
So, like, you and I are going to go out there and just be like, raw.
Just go Hulk mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, yeah, that's what's so interesting about that, the whole kind of structure debate, because you have people on both sides that are so adamant, and I say, there's a possibility, I suppose, but a lot of what people are putting out there, I mean, going in the woods, like in parks near cities and seeing all kinds of structures. I mean, as somebody who's also a naturalist, I've talked about this on I think it was even last year, or maybe the week before. I remember we'd go out and do debris shelters, middle of nowhere, lean-tos, all kinds of stuff. We were supposed to clean them up, but sometimes I would leave them out there, and I can imagine a few years later it deteriorates a little bit, and somebody comes out and says, "Hey, this was definitely Bigfoot." I mean, it happens. People are in the woods a lot in certain areas, so it wouldn't be unusual, especially in an area, to run into something that people have done. I mean,
now for me to really be solidly convinced of one of these X's that are out in the woods, I'm going to need to see the root ball sticking up in the air on at least one of the cross members. Then you'll get me convinced that the wind didn't do that. Like, I want to see something that is just completely impossible and other way, like in a natural way, and then I'll be convinced of the X's. But I mean, I'm probably gonna get some hate mail over this, but until then, I'm not 100% sold on those. There's too much natural evidence around them for me to be sold.
And weird stuff can happen in the woods when people are not around. I mean, even just the footage of those bears just climbing up into a sapling and, just buckling under their weight and twisting it and causing like what I've heard described as a pressure twist.
Yeah.
Just by the sheer weight of a big bear, climbing up into a little sapling. But Yeah, definitely an interesting debate. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon until someone is seeing one of these things really building structures. I know there's been some sightings. I don't know a whole lot about that though, but I did want to read this comment from Tate, who says, I bought 2 of the amazingly detailed and tiny Bigfoot track keychains that Joe makes. I need to get more. I highly recommend it. I actually think I have a few. It's somewhere in my Bigfoot collection. I think that may be what else I picked up from you at the OBC back then.
We didn't have them at that one, but I think I sent you a couple.
I think so. Okay. I was misremembering that.
And Tate, I need to get with you so that way we can get you over on the podcast, and I'll send you the rest of the set as a reward.
Very cool. Pennsylvania Sasquatch says, seriously though, Joe seems quite knowledgeable on the subject. I look forward to listening to the full podcast. Awesome. Yeah, definitely tune in. I mean, whatever. I mean, obviously it's fun to watch when it's live because you get to ask questions and interact. But happy for people to just tune in whenever they can. Especially we have some folks that are overseas, obviously in the UK. It's a tough time for them to stay up this late. So.
Oh yeah. So you want to see the newest cast?
You don't even have to ask.
Here we go.
Whoa.
Man. We got all 5 toes in this one.
Look at that bad boy.
This is over here. This is overpour. So this is not a 6th toe. Ignore that. Just pretend it's not there. The last toe is trying to do this in reverse is tough. Right here. There's our last toe.
Yeah, you can see the definition on there, definitely even through the camera.
It's a big one.
Wow.
So
now, is there a story behind it?
There is.
You can
this
talk
is
about it
from our latest investigation in a site that we now have permission to go back to routinely and investigate in, that we've called the Wineberry site.
And that's what you were talking about earlier, yeah.
Yeah, we were sent a report. It was actually a recording that somebody pulled on their phone, and we went out there. We made it within 2 weeks. We had a really bad ice storm. We were supposed to have been there within a couple of days, but we had a bad ice storm, and I was without power for a week and couldn't get off the mountain. So we had to cancel the first weekend and then wound up going out the next weekend. And they had still been having activity there. And she had a sighting herself there 2 years prior. And her family has had sightings there their entire like time they've had the property. And they've had the property. It's a multi-generational plot of land. And it's a few hundred acres. Like, this is just a massive area. I'd say probably only about 20% of it's developed. The rest of it is just forest. And it is just gorgeous, gorgeous land. There's so much food there. I've never been in one area that had that much food. And it had not just seasonal food, but year-round food. So this is an area that you could, pretty much host a creature in year-round, because you have tons of wildlife. So we had deer. I found deer tracks, skunk tracks, possum tracks. Found possum tracks. Found some weasel tracks. Squirrels were all over the place. Then there was ground cherries everywhere. There was a massive patch of wineberries, which is where the site got its name, because it's the biggest single patch of wineberries I've ever seen in my life. And I've been out in the woods a lot, and I'm talking this is almost a solid acre of wineberries in one spot. And I was just like, there's so much food here. There's just an abundance. And the people who live there aren't utilizing it. They're not going up and, they'll go up and pick berries every now and then, but they're not going out cleaning it out and all that. So, I mean, there's just so much and so many mushrooms. While we were there, we counted at least 19 different species of edible mushrooms.
Wow.
And yeah, it's crazy. Salamanders, fish, because there was a creek. There's also multiple streams that are just fed by spring water. And then there's a huge pond down at the bottom where there's tons of amphibians. So, I mean, you're talking food galore. And we were there and it was pouring the rain. We found 5 big depressions at the very end of the day. And that cast was one of them. The others were actually they were they've been up there sowing grass seed. So you know how you throw hay out and then you throw your seed? The rest of the footprints were actually in the hay, and you couldn't collect them. The hay just muted it, but you could definitely see the big depressions. And they just came out of this holler and went right back up into the woods. And this one cast was in the mud, partially in the mud. So that's where the toes were at. And it was awesome.
Yeah, that sounds like a place you're going to be hoping to get in there often, I'd imagine. Yeah,
we're planning a trip back early summer, and then we're also doing a multi-night investigation in the fall there.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Man. So I'm pretty excited to get out there, because here, like, I know a lot of people, they go out and they'll have like active times around 3 a.m. and whatnot. We don't get that here. I haven't been anywhere in West Virginia where we had too much activity after 1 a.m.
Okay, so it's sort of earlier in the night.
Right, starts right at dusk, goes till 1, and then it'll start around 5. Between 5 and 7, you can get some. You'll hear some audio going off out in the woods occasionally.
Wow.
If you can get the coyotes stirred up, you can generally try to get something else stirred up, basically.
Good to know. That's really, it's interesting. Now, Stefan, we haven't seen Stefan in a while. He asks, any work on the Grafton monster or the snarly yow? I read both had sightings in the West Virginia area. Obviously, the Grafton monster is pretty famous in the cryptid circles. Are you there, Joe? Oh, I think he might have frozen. I think you froze there. There we go.
Oh, you got me? Are you back?
All good.
Okay, so the Grafton monster, that is a monster that's named from Grafton County, West Virginia. There was only one reported sighting that I'm aware of that was actually like a real sighting, we'll say that. It was described as being a large seal, like the body looked like a wet seal kind of deal. Didn't see a head, and kind of a hulking being. In my opinion, it was a misidentified Sasquatch.
Interesting.
As far as the snarly yow, we haven't looked into the snarly yow. Haven't had any kind of reportings of anything like that, other than misidentified Bigfoot stuff, maybe. Sure. And I got the snallygaster too out there on the edge of Virginia and West Virginia. And well, of course, we got the Mothman and
lots of cool names, lots of cool creatures. Braxton County, aka the Flatwoods Monster. Just so many. I mean, that was actually one of the questions, I think, from Mike earlier in the show. He was talking about what makes West Virginia such a cryptid hotspot. Do you have any theories on that?
Well, I believe it has to do with the abundance of food. It's just me. You could pretty much, if you were a survivalist, West Virginia is a dreamscape. You can pretty much go anywhere in the woods in West Virginia and never walk out of them, but never go hungry. You're always going to have food. So you're going to have an uptick in probably some unidentified creatures being sighted in areas where you're going to have an abundance of food. As for the high strangeness stuff, when you start getting into Mothman or the Flatwoods Monster being UFO sighting and subsequent alien sighting, West Virginia is also the central hub for ufology historically.
That's right. Oh, absolutely.
The very first UFO conventions ever held took place in Charleston, West Virginia, and were hosted by Gray Barker. And, we had this massive satellite array that was built out at Green Bank a year after the Flatwoods Monster encounters took place. I don't think that's a coincidence at all, because the Flatwoods Monster took place during a string of UFO sightings that went all the way from Georgia to New York. And then there was just this one event where a creature was sighted on the ground. And it was a 2-day event, because it was Flatwoods Monster and then the Frametown Monster. Everybody who studies these things tend to think that those were the same creature, just seen on 2 different nights. But we're a weird place, man. That's why we went with Wild and Weird West Virginia. That's our legal trade name, and we've had some people try to steal it, but too bad. We paid for the rights on that, baby.
Oh no, definitely, and it makes sense. I mean, there's been a lot of historically a lot of researchers and a lot of just stories out of West Virginia. I mean, we
Yeah.
had on when I first started the show way back. I had on Les Odell. He does
Yep.
his thing too in West Virginia, and
Yeah,
just
he's
talking
down
about
the opposite end of the state from us. He's up north near the PA border. We're
yeah,
down south, more near the Kentucky and Virginia borders.
yeah, and it's just hearing some of the reports he was talking about too, just so interesting. You know, the different types of things aside from just the Bigfoot, which
Yes.
obviously, as the mountain state, you guys have a fair share and some really interesting ones. But so there was actually a question: have you ever seen a UFO? By Gabriel Ringenberg asked Joe, "Have you ever seen a UFO before?"
Uh, by definition, yes. Unidentified flying object, yes. I'm former Air Force. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff in the sky
Oh
that I
yeah,
can't describe. Um, and but my wife and I did see a weird orange object that just kind of moved through the sky, and it was there, and then all of a sudden it moved so fast that it wasn't there anymore. And we talked about that a little bit actually with Seth. We're going to be in the upcoming Dark Skies
yeah.
series that he's doing. Ron and I will be in that. And we talked about that a little bit. And then also talked about some of the other UFO cases that we've investigated. I kind of go along on those just because why not?
Fun, yeah. Diversifying the investigating a little bit.
And we've got speaking of the UFO stuff, we don't automatically, unlike a lot of other research organizations, we don't automatically discredit or poo-poo on any other Sasquatch-like sightings that take place that involve lights in the sky
The high
or
strangeness
glowing
factor.
orbs.
Right.
We do classify those as Sasquatch-like, not as like Sasquatch or Bigfoot, because a lot of the times, if you really listen to the reports, there are details, physical details that do not match with the physical characteristics of other sightings that have taken place with Sasquatch. Typically, the ones that you have with the lights in the sky, you're hearing about appendages that are not just down to the knee, but like way longer arms, skinny, emaciated creatures that are covered in sparse hair, also self-igniting, self-illuminated eyes. That's something else that typically goes along with that. And normally the physical characteristics do not match up with your typical Bigfoot report. So they kind of go into an other category. And we investigate those, and we also joint investigate some of those and pass those off to our friend Stan Gordon. He is the man when it comes to that stuff. And we talk to him on a regular basis and work with him hand in hand on any of our really, really weird stuff.
And that's great. I think people definitely appreciate the fact that you guys aren't just so set, I guess, in your ways that you would just take something like that and use your own confirmation bias that, hey, these things have to fit the parameters I believe they are, and just disregard people's reports. Obviously that happens, which is unfortunate. I definitely advocate for a little bit more of the open-mindedness and, just admitting, most of the reports don't have anything super weird associated with them, right? At least in my experience, a majority of the ones that come out are people describing what would seem to fit the characteristics of a physical animal, either trying to get away from them or whatever behaviors. But what's the point of throwing out those weirder reports just because you disagree with them? I mean,
there's
not right.
There's so much wrong with that if you're even looking at it from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
Purely from a scientific standpoint, all data has to go on the table. Otherwise, you have a bias in your research.
Yep.
So you have to put it all out there. And the problem, one of our favorite sayings that we tell people when we're out on the road is that, the data doesn't care about your feelings. The data doesn't care what you think. So
it's a great way to put it.
We have to separate our belief systems from your research, because if you can't separate your belief system, and I don't mean like a religious belief system, I mean your belief system of a Bigfoot does this, a UFO does this, then your data will be flawed, because you will read your data, you will read into your data on a bias. You won't be looking at it at face value. So you have to be able to put that stuff aside and just say, okay, I'm looking at this completely unobjectively, and I'm going to analyze everything here that's on the table. And then what we're done with is analyzed data. We don't try to tell people like, oh, you saw a Bigfoot, or, oh, you saw, like, we'll tell people, yeah, you saw a UFO, but we'll make sure to preface that with, by definition.
By the definition, yeah.
You saw an unidentified flying object. That doesn't mean you saw ET charting across the sky.
No, absolutely. And that's a great way to put it. And that's awesome. The data doesn't care about your feelings. And it's so true. I mean, there's enough confirmation bias as it is.
I'll send you one.
What's that?
We're putting that on a t-shirt, and I'll send you one.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I want to take this question too. There's a lot of really great questions, I got to say. Some really great ones coming in, but this one is awesome because I think it'll help. We were talking about casts earlier and talking about, the process. Maybe this will help people who have never done casting before. But Kevin asks, how long does it take for a cast to be dry enough to pick up? Is it a 2-day procedure?
Okay, it depends on your conditions. Typically, in a perfect world, your casting material is going to be dry between half an hour and 45 minutes. Again, depends on the conditions and the material. I like to use hydrocal, which is also called dental plaster. I prefer to use it because it sets up faster and it sets up harder, and it pours more fluidly. It goes into all the little nooks and crannies much easier. You don't have to kind of smear out the back end of it like peanut butter a little bit to get to fill in. It just pours way better. So hydrocal is what that's called. You can get that in the bag. A lot of your arts and crafts stores sell it. It's also what we cast a lot of our statues out of, because it renders a nice, clean, sandable product, and then we can paint them up and out the door. Nice. So I like to pour cast with that. Now, it can turn into a few hours long if you're doing it, say, on a creek bed, like how I'd mentioned earlier, right on the edge of a creek where there's water running into the side of it. That can take a few hours to set. However, I don't believe you're going to have to fool with anything where it's a 2-day procedure unless it's pouring the rain. And when I say pouring the rain, I'm talking like just buckets.
Torrential.
But you're also going to have to, if you're actually being realistic with yourself to capture that cast, you're going to have to build a box on site to cover the plaster to help keep the plaster from being broken up as it cures. Otherwise, you're going to go try to retrieve it, and you're going to pull out Play-Doh. That's what happened to me on my very first cast. So it was just raining nonstop, and it was a heavy rain, and it just the plaster would not cure no matter how long I set it up. Even once the little crumbles were brought inside, it continued to break down even further. So you're looking really at most under most conditions, you're looking at an hour and a half for bad conditions. Perfect conditions, half an hour to 45 minutes. 45 minutes to be safe.
Absolutely. And that's good. If you're out in the woods and, as you said, perfect conditions, you can leave it there and maybe go for a stroll, and you don't have to stay there the whole time. But I think it's important to know because, in this field, we talk a lot about casts and footprint findings. And a lot of times, people just have basic questions like it. Maybe they're embarrassed to ask, that sort of thing. And I'm glad people are willing to just say, how long does it take?
Here's another simple thing too that will also help you in retrieving a cast. Go to your local hardware store and purchase a really, really nice broad-headed regular or flathead screwdriver, whatever you call it, whether you call it a regular or a flathead. Get one of those, and make sure you get one that's at least got a 1/2 inch wide head on it. And what I do is I carry that around in my backpack, and once the cast is ready, I actually go through and take the screwdriver and just cut it out of the ground around the edges, and then we'll actually shove underneath and use it like a lever to start breaking it away from the soil. For example, this cast right here, if you look at it, there was a lot of love in getting this thing out. those are roots. All that stuff you see, the fibers, most of those fibers are roots. So there's a lot of work in trying to get that one out. And
I think we may have lost him there again.
all right, we back?
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I hope that's just not on my end and I'm just making it awkward, but.
Yeah, no, I went out too on that one.
Okay.
So let me fix it. Come on, work with me. I'm fuzzy.
Always with the tech stuff. It happens to me more than I like to admit.
So anyway, you saw the roots on that cast, and I had to get down underneath it and wedge it, and get my hands underneath it and rip it up. Now we actually videoed that, and we're going to be posting the video here in the next week or two of the entire investigation process, as well as the cast removal. So you're going to get to see that kind of delicate process and the butt clenching that took place as it was coming out of the ground.
Oh, I can imagine. Kevin says, I didn't expect the process to be that quick. Thanks for the info. Yeah, thank you for the question, Kevin. So we had a cool question actually about your event. Let's see if I can find that here from Greg Morrill, another one of our Canadian friends who's of All the Weird podcast. He asks, sorry if anyone asked this, do you have any guests confirmed for Wild and Weird Con?
Yeah, pretty much all of our guests from last year are coming back this year because we had to cancel last year's event. So
right.
We've got to touch base with a few of them just to make sure they're still on board.
Sure.
But pretty much everybody we've talked to is going to come back. And that was Jeff Walmsley, Eric Altman. We had Dave Spinks. Then we had Wayne Barnes and BSI, which was Bigfoot Sasquatch Investigations. Cool. And we had the only one that I really have to reach back out to and confirm with is Bilko Productions, and they were going to be doing a presentation of Native Bigfoot. We were supposed to do the theatrical release for Native Bigfoot, but that didn't happen. So.
Yeah, I remember talking to him about that. It was just, I was, a lot, as you know, I mean, all the events that were canceled in 2020 and just the unfortunate nature of everything. So that's awesome that it'll be the same lineup basically as if the event hadn't been canceled, hopefully. Same kind of feeling. So that's awesome. So we have two questions here that are basically related. I'm just going to kind of combine them. But Peter and Remiel ask, any stories related to caves that stand out down in West Virginia?
Some ghost stories. Those were pretty decent spook-like stories around the caves. And then a couple Bigfoot sightings that took place around them. But as far as like good stories go, I mean, it's like, dude was out hiking, saw a Bigfoot bolt into a cave, decided not to follow Bigfoot into a cave because logic took hold. That kind of thing. But the spook lights are probably what interests me the most.
Oh, cool.
Because I have actually seen one of the spook lights near one of the old mine shafts. And that was a trip.
Yeah, and you guys have a lot of the mining history there, so it really makes you wonder. Spook lights is just a very strange kind of phenomenon, but I mean, it's I don't know. I haven't looked a whole lot into it, but very, very interesting.
I wish my camera wasn't so blurry. Do I look blurry to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's focusing on the.
It's trying to focus up close. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, that's back.
Sorry about that.
Awesome. No worries. Mike asks, Joe, are you going to the Triangle Sasquatch Conference?
Haven't heard of the Triangle Sasquatch Conference. So Tactical Bigfoot Research, feel free to reach out to me at my Facebook page. It's Joe Perdue, is the same as what you see right here. Me and my wife in the picture are with our kid and the Mothman statue. So you can send me a friend request there, or you can get a hold of me over at Wild and Weird West Virginia's Facebook page and just send us a message and maybe send us some information, whatever information you have about that, because I'm interested.
Yeah, definitely. With events coming back, that sounds like a great, great idea. Just kind of spreading the word a little bit. I think that's like a Pennsylvania event or somewhere in northern West Virginia. I'm not sure. I've just heard a little bit of it. I don't know a whole lot, but Okay, here's kind of a funny one from Outcast Jeff. He asks, what's the deal with mountain monsters? Are they fake or what? I'm sure you get asked that all the time.
Oh man. Okay. All right. So anybody who's met those guys loves them. They're some of the nicest goobers you're ever going to meet. That show is purely entertainment. It just is. It was entertainment. It was fun, games, laughs, and I guess I know some folks that's like their guilty pleasure is to go watch those guys run around the woods, scream, cuss, and shoot guns. I couldn't watch it being former military and having a whole lot of weapons training.
Yeah.
I cringe and like start twitching every time I turn it on because the cameraman runs in front of a loaded, well, probably not loaded, but
yeah,
loaded
right.
weapon.
But still, the safety principle there is pretty awful.
I'm losing it. Like that happens like in almost every episode, and I'm like, what is it? Y'all are from California. I can tell. And so, but the Mountain Monsters guys, they're all here from West Virginia. They're great guys. They're nice guys, but the show's pure entertainment, and they're super nice guys though. Like if you ever get a chance to go meet some of them, they will sit and talk your ear off. If you're interested in talking to them, they will sit and give you all the time in the world, even if there's like a line 2 miles long behind you.
And I was just going to say, I mean, I remember at the Mothman Festival, one time I was there just seeing the line. It had to have been a mile long. People waiting to go see them because they're local celebrities in the area too. They're famous in West Virginia. I mean,
they're going to just take their time with everybody that comes up there and let them take as many pictures as they want. They ain't in a hurry to save anybody. They're just there having a good time, and they'll sit there through the entire line too. As long as there's a line there, they're not going nowhere. They're just going to sit, hang out, and talk to everybody. They're such great people.
Yeah, but Mike says those guys are salt of the earth and have huge hearts.
Absolutely. Every single one of them are take the shirt off their back right now kind of people and give it to you. So, it's their but the show it does do it does have some issues when you're doing real active research, because then everybody's like, the Mountain Monsters guys.
Right. I know a lot of people have trouble differentiating that, the sort of dramatized, mockumentary sort of stuff. That's the genre I'd put them in. And, there's stuff like that's purposely been, I would say, quasi-deceitful, like the Animal Planet stuff with the mermaids and the megalodon stuff. And that's a little bit more lighthearted because they're getting like peed on by monsters and trees and like just like it's funny. It's funny.
Yeah, where the sheep squatch peed.
Yeah. I mean, that's like funny. That's you could have a good time with that.
Yeah,
but a lot of people think it's legit because they're just you never know these days with what's content and everything. Yeah, no, it's thanks for the question. I'm sure, as you mentioned, coming from West Virginia, obviously that comes up a lot.
It does.
That topic.
And I'm glad that I was the one that was asked that question, because there are people that have much harsher feelings towards those folks than what I do. And I've met them a couple of times. They're just great guys. They're great guys.
And I've heard the same about them. And like I said, just seeing from the way that people treat them in West Virginia, they're locals and people love them. But as we start to sort of wrap up here a little bit, I do want to take this, it's not really a question, but it's obviously a topic that's kind of near and dear to me, the topic of mountain lions. And you guys deal with that. But Guy 15 says, it's off topic. It's on topic now. He says, but I wanted to share, my neighbor recently told me that his buddy shot and killed a mountain lion on the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. I was so surprised at how he didn't think it was a big deal. Really interesting. Now that topic, I've talked to Les a little bit about it, and other folks. Obviously, you guys have a lot of sightings as well.
So unofficially, the DNR, if you actually confront the DNR, they're going to say, no, we don't have mountain lions. They're extinct, blah, blah, blah. But if you're educated in the fact that Western mountain lions, lone males, are recorded coming all the way east up into your area, they're going to say, oh yeah, we've seen those studies. We do occasionally have a lone male come through the area, and they will unofficially tell you, yes, we do have lone males that do frequent the area. Last year, one got hit by a car on I-79. And he wasn't tagged, but it was 100% a Western Cougar. And it totaled the little, Honda Accord that hit it, because it was doing 70 miles an hour when it hit this thing. And it was actually the person who hit it, their spouse was part of the Master Naturalist Association in West Virginia.
No kidding. So it's very, there's some credibility behind that.
Yep. That's how I found out about that report, because they actually told us about it at our the meeting a few days after the wreck happened.
Oh, wow. So it's and obviously with Lions of the East that I did last year, and I've talked to other guests about this in different parts of the East Coast where, it's the same story everywhere, where it's the local Fish and Game or the Warden Service or Department of Natural Resources or whatever each state, they individually call their people that deal with the wildlife, environmental police, blah, blah, blah. There's that denial factor, and it really creates like a distrust with the public, and there are reports coming in and just people don't want to talk about it. Oftentimes, if anybody in a uniform's coming around, and there's been some pretty interesting stuff, and as I've talked about with my documentary as well, where like DNA evidence has been brushed under the rug. So it's this weird kind of conspiracy thing going on. Gets a lot of people riled up, but it's an interesting topic, and I love hearing in other parts of the East Coast. It's just the same kind of thing, and in your area and even further down south as well. Just same sort of stories, wherever you go, basically, until something happens. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the bigger reasons why it's covered up is most of the states on the East Coast. I don't know how it is where you're at, but a lot of the park services are actually employed through the DNR. So you have your DNR officers and DNR law enforcement, but then you have your DNR park workers, like all of our state park, state forest workers. Those are all DNR employees. And the reason why the DNR denies these so much is because we have so many state parks that are so heavily frequented by hikers, mountain bikers. They don't want them to freak out. Hey, there's my dog. She decided to wake up. They don't want them to freak out and think that, there's a mountain lion that could be stalking them while they're hiking, because it's something that is really has become a foreign concept here for so long. So that's one reason why they deny it so heavily, is just because they're so interconnected and so tied into the park services that they don't want to generate this fear of going out and hiking.
Right.
That's the biggest reason for the denial, in my opinion.
Yeah. I would tend to agree, and I think it comes down to money, as often does with the government not wanting to deal with that separate predator. I mean, especially up in here, we deal with moose and bear. That's the biggest. Moose are not predators, but that's responsible for a lot of fatalities. I mean, people that have seen
many people as they kill.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. I'm more worried in general about moose up here in the woods. They're more aggressive, like the cows, and especially if there's disease that the brain worm that rots away their brain, they can act very irrationally. So I'm more worried about them than I am bears. But people might have seen the show Northwoods Law. That's about the Maine Warden Service, and then past like 6 seasons have been here in New Hampshire with the Fish and Game Department. And some of the guys in the show I've interviewed for my documentary, and it's the same kind of thing. It's officially they're not here, but we may have some Western individuals that have come out here. Obviously, there was a case in Connecticut in 2011 where one was killed, not an hour from New York City in one of the most heavily populated areas of the country, and supposedly it came from South Dakota. So that's that famous case. So they all kind of want to say that it's not official, that they're just stragglers, but there's some people who believe there's breeding populations. I mean, it just depends who you talk to, but it's really an interesting topic. And when I was doing I have
a cast down in the basement that I'll show you one day.
Oh, that'd be awesome. It was so interesting. Like when I was working on the project Lines of the East, trying to narrow it down to just I was originally going to do much of the East Coast, but it just was too overwhelming. So I had to focus in on just New England. I mean, and I was going through a lot of the archives from the North American Puma Research Center, I believe it was. It was like this group that was operating in the 90s and the 2000s. They had a newsletter because back then, obviously, with the internet, and just seeing the reports, I mean, they'd have so many from West Virginia and from that area, from West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, New York State, and then up into New England states.
West Virginia is a great place for something like that to just hunker down and hide out anyway, just because we were declared back in July. They upped our rating from 78 to 82% forested.
Yeah.
Due to a lot of the mine reclamation sites that have been turned back into forest. So
it's interesting. I think West Virginia is actually third or fourth after, and I always cite the stat because I love it, but Maine is the most forested state in the country. New Hampshire is number 2, and I think West Virginia is actually number 3, if I remember correctly.
I believe it's one of the P&W states, and then we're behind them. We're 3.
I know it's you guys are like very close to us up here in the Northeast in terms of that, and it shows. I mean, when you're just driving on the highway and through West Virginia, you're seeing some of these mountains, even just outside of the city. It's just a lot of woods, and it reminded me of up here in northern New England.
Yeah, man, it's one of those funny things where when we travel outside of West Virginia, we'll start talking to some of the folks, and they're like, "Oh yeah," they'll ask like, "So do you guys want to go grab something to eat somewhere?" And like, it's like we got to go. It's far away. It's like 25 minutes, and we're like, "We got to drive like an hour to go to the grocery store. What are you talking about? Far away? That's quick. Let's go."
Right. That's a quick little trip. Yeah, no, I'm sure we could talk specifically about that topic on end because it's really interesting.
We've had a lot of black cat sightings.
That's the element too that's very interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's part of it. It's integral to the actual mystery itself. With the Black Panther enigma, let's call it, because even the people that are willing to admit, sure, there are mountain lions possibly living in this area, are quick to say, well, hey, but there's no documentation of black ones, but people are still having the sightings. So something's going on
with you over the genealogy to say, and I'm somebody who I've worked with reptiles, like I said, for 25 years earlier. Right. I'm really good on genetics because we selectively breed reptiles for specific collars and traits and whatnot. It's real easy to generate a melanistic trait.
Right.
All you need is a small population, and you're going to be slinging out melanistics and albinos like candy, Yeah,
and it's like what is easier to believe that there is possibly in a species like the Puma concolor, which are one of the most widely distributed species in North America, at least formerly, in terms of the habitat they live in. What's easier to believe that there may be a certain melanistic strain in some of them, or you have jaguars coming down from Mexico coming up, or it's all escaped pets. I mean, going back to the 1800s even, I don't know.
All it takes is a small isolated pocket that has interbred over roughly 6 to 8 generations, and you're going to start getting mutations. You're going to have the melanoids, you're going to have your albinos. These mutations are going to start showing up. They're also going to have some pretty gnarly mutations where you're going to get disfigured offspring that just don't survive.
Right.
But you're going to have those mutations that are viable mutations. We see them in deer, where you see piebald deer. That's a recessive gene. Albinos are a recessive gene. Melanistic is a recessive gene. All it takes is a small breeding pool in an isolated area, and you're going to have all of those. They just start to show up. It's just how nature works.
And oftentimes those animals, they don't fare too well compared to, at least with some species. I know, like with albino alligators, you obviously talk about reptiles a lot, at least from the little I know, having seen some recently in Florida as well, the albino alligators, they're easy to spot. They're a lot easier. Right. They can't camouflage as well. So they're much more susceptible to being killed or eaten when they're younger. So it's tough for those kinds of animals. I mean, even with humans, we have examples of albinism all over the world, and those people are killed and eaten in some parts of the world, which is just absolutely brutal.
Crazy, because they think they have magical powers.
Right. So it's unfortunate, but anyway, yeah, like I said, we could talk about that topic for hours, but just starting to wrap up here. I did want to take this question from Will Montano. He asked, "Hey, what's up, AP? How's everyone doing tonight? Aleks, what's your thought on Bigfoot Odyssey trip and upcoming documentary? I don't know a whole lot about it. I was on Daniela's show, I think, a few weeks ago, and I know they were out in the field in Florida, and I'm assuming they're doing like a documentary about it. So pretty cool. Obviously, there's some great spots down in Florida, no doubt about it. There's just a lot of obviously skunk ape and that sort of stuff. So wish them the best. I'm sure it'll be an interesting piece to check out. Remiel here says, we can speculate the government has a much deeper agenda on the secrecy regarding Bigfoot. There are reasons for this we still can't comprehend. What do you think about that? What do you think about the idea of this government involvement as somebody formerly, I guess, an employee of the government?
Well, you got, I don't know if you've seen some of the UFO stuff that's come out recently, where some of the members of Congress were saying, we can't leak out this stuff because it's demonic in nature. So we still have this hold of these religious dogmas, and they think, for whatever reason, that we can't handle stuff that doesn't mesh with what we've been taught in church, which is quite the opposite. In fact, we do pretty well with that kind of stuff. Being a former minister myself, I mean, I'm a Bigfoot researcher. So I think that it stems back to that, because a lot of people look at Bigfoot as kind of like a missing evolutionary link, if in fact it is real, or could be proven to be real, be proven to be some kind of a relic hominin, that it could be somewhere in our family tree, which is plausible. And they think that for whatever reason that could possibly cause some kind of pandemonium in the streets, and people are running around and, doing all kinds of craziness. But I don't think that's the case. But for whatever reason, the powers that be seem to behave that way, at least with the UFO topic. So I could see the crossover with Bigfoot kind of being similar.
It seems like our society is creating people going crazy either way. So it's like, well, how much crazier can we get? Just let us know about this stuff. But I think my problem with it is, people are so obsessed almost, I think, and maybe that comes more from the UFO topic. They're obsessed with what the government has to say. I mean, if you take a room full of people, doesn't matter who they vote for, and ask them, do they trust the government? How many people are going to raise their hand? You're probably going to get a minority of people. So
I worked for them. I didn't trust them when I worked for them.
Right. So it's like, I think we need to kind of maybe get past that, needing the disclosure thing. I understand, there's people that are, they've been working towards that, but we've seen recently, supposedly mainstream news people and other sources, and, the DOD, other ones talking about the footage and treating the UFO subject a little bit more mainstream. And with everything else going on, it's only been it hasn't been the front cover of the newspapers or the big stories. It's like page 3, or you got to look for the article on the website that has the story about the UFO thing. And it's like people aren't even really that interested in a way, which I think is kind of weird.
It is so bizarre. It is a really weird time to be alive, man. And
it's as long, I mean, I don't know. We got the woods and we got our retreat. So that for me that's like all I really need. It's just to deal with the craziness. But man, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Very knowledgeable about a lot of these topics. Would love to have you on in the future, maybe with Ron, and we can talk about your event more, and just like some other topics, maybe some updates on some of the investigations.
Yeah, that'd be great. Real quick, one last thing that I definitely want to let people know about.
Go for it.
We have 4 spots open right now on a Bigfoot investigation workshop that we're putting on. And that is on May the 8th. It's in Kanawha State Forest in West Virginia. So if you're listening and you're near West Virginia and you want to make the trip, it's $20. That's going to cover your casting materials, because everybody's going to take a commemorative cast home. We're going to teach you how to cast your own tracks.
That's so cool.
We're going to teach you how to use audio equipment. We're going to teach you how to go and actually track animals and track, through the woods, how to find these things. Teach you the difference between like a walkthrough area or a habitation site. The things that are required to sustain these creatures, for like they're a calorie, something's going to be substantial food, versus if it's just a walkthrough area. We're going to teach you how to cast in a few different environments to be successful in your casting. And then at the end of the night, we're actually going to go out and we're going to take you into one of our research areas, and you get to hang out with us. We're going to set up our audio array, which is a new 3D audio system that we've put together, and we're setting it up out in the woods and letting you guys see it and see how it works. It is a wicked system, and it basically is going to let us listen to every direction in the forest. And we're working on building a second one of these things, so that way we can make the array even larger and collect even more audio data. And but $20, it covers your food because raw pork. I'm a classically trained chef, so the food's going to be good. I'm making pulled pork, and we're going to have some hot dogs and stuff like that.
Oh, sounds awesome. So if you guys are in the West Virginia area, definitely take that up. Now, I have a link to, I believe, your website, Wild and Weird, in the comments below. But that's something a little bit different about your event, right? You're not just having speakers and, the typical sort of thing where it's people talking, but are you doing workshops at the actual Wild and Weird Con?
We wanted to do something different, at least different for what we have seen and what we've been a part of. We love the Bigfoot conferences. We love the paranormal conferences. Yeah. We love going to Mothman, but those are just fun places and fun things to go do. We wanted to create something that you could come to, and if you're an attendee, you're going to learn something. You're not just going to come listen to somebody speak. You're going to take something home to put in your toolbox that you're going to be able to use out in the field, whether you're a paranormal researcher, a UFO researcher, Bigfoot researcher. You're going to go home knowing more than what you came there knowing. And it's a different kind of approach. It's actually technically what a conference is supposed to be. Right. And for all, like if you go to a conference for work, you're going to
a lot of workshopping and
yeah. So we're doing a lot of workshops. We're also having the vendors. We're having all the fun stuff that everybody wants to come and enjoy, but we're going to teach you. We're gonna give you as much information and as much of our knowledge that we can get from all the speakers, not just from me and Ron and Dave or any of the other guys on our team, but it's and Wayne, but it's going to be all the researchers who are coming in are going to contribute in some way. And they're going to be doing workshops. They're going to teach different classes on whatever their specific skill is that they feel that they've got down really good, and that they feel that they can teach you. That's what they're going to teach. And so it's going to be a really, really good conference. That's the model that we're going to keep moving forward, is that all of the Wild and Weird cons will be an educational experience. It's not just going to be come to a show and go through a vendor fair. You're actually going to be able to come and learn something and get your hands dirty.
I love it. That's awesome. Props to you guys for kind of thinking outside the box there, and I'm sure people are going to love it, and I'm glad that the event will be happening this year. So folks, definitely check out Joe and check out Wild and Weird West Virginia. They've obviously got a lot of cool stuff going on, active research. Like I said, I've linked down below their website. I think I put a couple other links in there as well to the Facebook group or something like that. So, so yeah, check those out, guys. And thank you again, Joe, for coming on. It was awesome. You had a lot of information just about so many different topics, and I'm sure we'd love to have you back on the show at some point.
Oh man, anytime. You just say the word, I'll be here, man. And for anybody who's wanting to check us out and listen to us rabble on more about different stuff, and eventually we're going to get you on here, buddy, and we're going to get you on Wild and Weird Radio, and look us up anywhere podcasts are found, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Awesome questions, fantastic questions as always. Great comments as well. A lot of great to see people from the West Virginia area. Very cool to see local people and people from all over. So
this has been my favorite interview I've done so far with anybody, just because the comment section that's awesome.
I love it. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of it sometimes because there's so much going on. But sure. But definitely, guys, thanks as always for tuning into the show. And please, if you like this kind of content, feel free to subscribe, share it. You can listen to the episodes in the podcast form. Obviously, it's not as interactive, but it's still worth something. You get to hear Joe talking about a lot of the interesting topics we're obviously talking about tonight. So just a reminder for next week's show. It's my first time actually not hosting my own show. It'll be Karac St. Laurent of Crash Course Cryptozoology, and he's going to be doing his presentation, like a PowerPoint format, really interesting, super smart guy. It's about what he believes are some of the best examples of Bigfoot evidence. So I believe it's going to be talking about stuff beyond just, the PGF film, some other forms of evidence, which are really cool. I'm excited to listen to that after it happens, because I'm going to be out in the middle of the woods in the Pacific Northwest, so I probably won't have any service. So yeah, again, guys, feel free to tune in to that and check out some of the previous episodes. And until then, I will see you guys in a few weeks, and everyone have a great rest of your night and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.